My parents forbade me from celebrating my 18th birthday because my sister didn't feel special enough, so I moved out that night. A year later, their golden daughter saw how successful I'd become, and her jealous meltdown shattered the family. To understand what happened at my grandma's 70th birthday party, you have to understand what it was like growing up in my house, because the party wasn't really the beginning of anything. It was just the place where a pattern that had been running for 18 years finally ran out of road. I was the younger of two daughters. My sister was 3 years older, and from as far back as I can remember, our house operated on a kind of emotional triage. Whoever was struggling the loudest got the attention, the money, and both parents at once. My sister was almost always the one struggling the loudest, and I got very good, very early, at not needing anything. I was 7 the first time I noticed the pattern clearly enough to name it, even if I didn't have the words yet. I had a small part in my elementary school's spring program, 1 line and a song, and I'd practiced it in the bathroom mirror for 2 weeks. The night of the program, my sister, then 10, developed a stomachache that resolved itself within an hour of the show ending. Nobody came to watch me sing. My mother explained it in the car afterward, patient as a bank teller counting bills. "Your sister needed us tonight. I'm sure you did wonderful." That sentence became the shape of my whole childhood. Never watched, always assumed. My accomplishments were things my parents were confident had gone fine without them. The same way you're confident the mail arrived without checking the box. When I was 12, I saved 4 months of allowance for a pair of white sneakers I'd wanted since I saw them in a magazine. 2 weeks after I bought them, my sister decided a nearly identical pair from my closet were exactly what she needed for a school dance, and my mother packaged the request as a kindness I was expected to extend without being asked twice. I gave her the shoes. I don't remember being asked so much as informed. By 14, I understood the rules well enough to stop testing them. A good grade of mine got mentioned briefly and folded into whatever crisis my sister was currently having. A bad grade of hers became a 2-hour conversation about her mental health and what more the family could be doing to support her. I want to be fair about something before I go further. My parents never hit me. I had a roof, food, clothes, rides to school. On paper, I was well cared for. But in my house, being fine wasn't a feeling anyone checked on. It was a job I'd been hired for around age 7 and never once given a day off from. There was exactly one person who ever seemed to notice the arithmetic of our house and feel bad about it, and that was my dad. Every so often, I'd catch him looking at me across the wreckage of another ruined evening with an expression like a man watching weather roll in that he had no plans to come inside for. The summer I turned 15, he found me doing homework on the porch steps because the kitchen table was occupied by another one of my sister's crises, and he sat down next to me and said, "Out of nowhere, 18 is yours, kiddo. Whatever you want that year, I promise." I held on to that promise for 3 years the way you'd hold on to a seed packet, checking the date on it, waiting for the right season to plant it. I had no idea it would take exactly 3 years to sprout into the worst week of my life up to that point, and the best year after it. I didn't ask for much when it came time to plan the thing. I'd never been the kind of kid who wanted a big production, mostly because I'd learned not to want things loudly in a house where wanting things loudly belonged to my sister alone. What I wanted was small. Dinner in my grandma's backyard, string lights in the old maple tree, a cake from the bakery 3 blocks from her house that did a chocolate one with cream filling I'd loved since I was 6, 12 people, folding chairs, my name spelled right on the cake for once. I'd been saving toward the idea of 18 for longer than I'd been saving actual money for it. I babysat for 2 families most Saturdays and put almost all of it into an account my mother had opened for me at 14, back when the bank required a parent as co-signer for a minor. By 17, I'd put in a little over $6,000 across 3 years of Saturdays, the kind of number that felt enormous because I'd built it myself, one shift at a time. I'd asked more than once about opening my own account once I turned 18, so the co-signer requirement would go away, and the money would just be mine on paper the way it already felt like mine in every other sense. My mother kept saying some version of "after your birthday, sweetheart," one thing at a time, and I noticed it each time she said it, filed it away without quite letting myself think too hard about why she kept postponing something that should have taken 20 minutes at a branch downtown. My grandma was the one who'd actually gotten excited about the party with me, which tells you something about where I ranked in my own house's priorities. She'd offered her backyard the moment I mentioned it, told me she'd handle the tablecloths, and threatened, only half joking, to invite the whole cul-de-sac if I didn't stop her. She was 79 at the time, sharp as a tack, and constitutionally incapable of pretending to care about things she didn't care about, which made her enthusiasm about my birthday feel like the only unconditional thing in my life. 3 weeks before the date, I handwrote 12 invitations myself, because we'd never gotten around to sending anything formal, and some instinct in me had known, even then, not to make it official until I was sure it was actually going to happen. I drew a small sun in the corner of each one, sealed them, and put them in my desk drawer, face down, telling myself I'd hand them out once my mother confirmed the guest list with my grandma. I never did get the chance to hand a single one out. 3 days before my 18th birthday, my sister came home from what she'd been calling an incredible opportunity, a design and wellness program in another state, very selective, needing a deposit sent within days or her spot would go to somebody else. My parents had scraped the deposit together within 48 hours of her asking, which impressed me a little at the time before I understood what that scraping had actually involved. The night before my birthday eve, she called my parents from her new dorm sounding shaky, said the program wasn't what she expected, said she felt overwhelmed and wanted to come home. By the next morning, she was back on our couch wrapped in the good quilt, narrating the unfairness of it all to anyone who walked past, and the house rearranged itself around her the way it always did. That evening, my mom knocked on my bedroom door with 2 mugs of cocoa and the particular gentle voice she used whenever she was about to take something back. Sweetheart, about your party. With everything your sister is going through right now, it would just feel wrong to celebrate around her. It would break her heart. I asked as calmly as I could manage what exactly the new plan was. Postpone, she said, bright as a coupon, just until your sister's feeling stronger. We'll do something small later. Family only. I'd heard my mother use the word later enough times in my life to know exactly what it meant. Later was where things went in my house to quietly stop existing. I asked her, for the first time in my entire life at that kitchen table, when exactly my turn was scheduled. I'd like to see the calendar, I said. Her face flickered for a second, then settled back into its usual patience. And she said the sentence that I've thought about more times than I can count in the 2 years since. Oh, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own. There it was, spoken plainly for maybe the first time, though it had been the operating principle of my entire childhood. Being fine was my contribution to the household. It was the tax I paid so everyone else's feelings could stay balanced. Behind her, my dad appeared in the doorway. He looked at me, and for one full second, I could see that he knew exactly what was happening and exactly how wrong it was. He opened his mouth. Then my sister called something from downstairs, wet and urgent, and the doorway was empty before he'd said a single word. That was the whole length of time it took a 3-year-old promise to fold in on itself. My mother squeezed my knee on her way out. You'll understand when you have a more sensitive child of your own someday, she said, like it was a comfort. I sat very still after they left, listening to the house rearrange itself one floor down around my sister the way it always did. I didn't cry, and I didn't argue further. And if you've ever been the strong one in a family like mine, you already know why. Practice. 2 hours later, the bakery called. A cheerful girl asked me to confirm the changes on the order, and when I told her I hadn't made any, she read them to me anyway, oblivious to what each word was doing to me. Same cake, new pickup date, 4 days later than mine, new inscription. They'd kept the chocolate cake with cream filling I'd chosen back in the summer, and simply had my name scraped off and replaced with welcome home. I thanked her because none of it was her fault, and hung up and stood in my room while something in my chest went very quiet and very level, like a field after the machine that cuts everything down has already passed through it. People imagine decisions like the one I made that night happen in some kind of blaze, all heat and shouting. Mine didn't. It happened the way frost comes in on a clear night. No wind, nothing dramatic, just everything quietly finished growing all at once. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf and packed the way you pack when part of you has been getting ready to leave for a long time without admitting it out loud. Clothes for work and everything else. My laptop. The 12 handwritten invitations, still sealed, still face down where I'd left them. A framed photo of my grandma, the only person in my extended family who'd ever once asked what I wanted rather than telling me what I should be fine with. I thought about the joint account on my way out, the one with a little over $6,000 in it that I'd built one Saturday at a time since I was 14. I didn't take anything out that night. It hadn't occurred to me yet that I needed to. It was, as far as I understood it, mine, held in trust the way a joint account is supposed to work. My mother's name on it only because the bank had required an adult co-signer for a minor back when I opened it. I'd find out in 6 weeks how wrong that understanding was. I came down the stairs with a bag on each shoulder. My mom was at the kitchen island with her tea, and when she saw the bags, her face went straight to irritation instead of alarm, which told me more about her than almost anything else that week had. For heaven's sake, don't be theatrical, she said. Where exactly do you think you're going? I told her I had a shift in the morning, which was true, and left the rest unsaid. My sister watched from the couch with the quilt pulled up to her chin, and for half a second something crossed her face that looked almost like envy. The way you might envy someone who gets to be the one leaving, instead of the one everybody has to manage. My dad followed me out onto the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand before I could say anything. A couple of 20s, the kind of cash a man keeps quietly setting aside in a drawer for exactly this kind of night. I handed it back. I didn't want to walk out of that house owing anyone anything they could bring up later. He didn't argue. He just said, call your grandmother. She worries. He didn't say, don't go. We both heard him not say it. I walked the 1.5 miles to my aunt's apartment under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, and when she opened the door and saw the 2 bags on my shoulders, she didn't ask a single question. She just stepped back and said, spare room's still got a mattress in it, and put the kettle on. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake with a single candle she'd stuck in it, looking almost embarrassed by the gesture, and I understood something standing in her tiny kitchen that I'd been circling for years without landing on it fully. Being fine had been the rent I paid to live in that house. As of that week, I stopped paying it. My aunt was my dad's younger sister, and she'd never married or had kids of her own, which she liked to joke made her either the saddest or the smartest person in the family depending on the week. She worked as a dental hygienist and kept her apartment so tidy it looked like nobody lived there, and she had exactly one rule for me those first weeks, which was that I didn't have to explain anything until I was ready to. I found a job within 4 days at a diner 2 towns over, the kind of place that hired anyone willing to work a Sunday morning shift. I picked up every double they'd give me, partly because I needed the money, and partly because staying busy kept me from replaying the bakery phone call on a loop every time I sat still for more than 10 minutes. The diner work was hard in a way that felt honest, which was new to me. Nobody there cared whether I was fine or not fine. They cared whether the coffee got refilled and the tables got bussed. And at the end of each shift, I had a number in an apron pocket that was entirely the result of my own hands and nobody else's mood. I started keeping a small spiral notebook where I wrote down my hours and my tips, not because I needed to for tax purposes expenses yet, but because seeing the numbers written in my own handwriting made them feel more real than they had any right to feel. My aunt didn't hover, but she also didn't disappear. She left a plate for me most nights I worked late, covered in foil on the counter. No note, no comment, just there. It took me almost a month to say thank you out loud for one of those plates, and when I finally did, she just said, "That's what the fridge is for," and changed the subject, which was somehow exactly the right response. I enrolled in a part-time bookkeeping certificate program at the community college 2 weeks into living with her, mostly because a regular at the diner mentioned her niece had done the same program and now made real money doing books for small local businesses. I liked the idea of a skill that was entirely mine, portable, invisible to anyone who wanted to take credit for it later. I signed up for evening classes around my shifts and told almost nobody, not because it was a secret, but because I'd gotten so used to accomplishments disappearing into someone else's crisis that keeping this one quiet felt like the only way to protect it. 6 weeks into that new rhythm, right around the time I'd built up enough of a cushion in tips to feel like I could finally breathe, I decided it was time to do the thing I should have done the day I turned 18. Walk into a bank, open an account in my name alone, and move the $6,000 I'd spent 3 years building out of the joint account my mother still technically controlled. I had no idea, walking in that morning, that the number on the screen was about to be smaller than the number in my head by more than $5,000. The teller pulled up the account and her expression did the thing bank employee expressions do when the screen disagrees with what the customer is expecting to hear. She turned her monitor slightly, and I saw the number before she said it out loud. $341. I asked her to check again, thinking there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. She pulled the transaction history, and there it was in black and white, dated 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. A single withdrawal of $5,900, processed at a branch across town I'd never once set foot in. I did the math sitting in the lobby chair before I'd even made it back out to the parking lot. $5,900 was almost exactly the deposit amount my sister had needed, urgently within 48 hours, for her very selective design and wellness program, the same program she'd lasted 11 days in before calling home in tears. The math wasn't complicated. It had just taken me 6 weeks to be in a position to do it. I called my mother from the parking lot before I fully decided I was going to. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her what I'd found, she didn't pause the way I expected. "Family money goes where the family needs it," she said, using the calm voice she used whenever she wanted a conversation to sound smaller than it was. "Your sister's future was on the line. You're young, you're healthy, you'll earn it back in no time." I asked if she understood what she'd just told me, that she'd taken 3 years of my Saturdays and spent them on 11 days of somebody else's life. She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "This is what families do," she said, gentler now, like she was leaving a tip for a waitress who'd taken the news badly. I should say plainly, because it matters for what happened later, that this was, as far as the bank was concerned, completely legal. A joint account belongs to both names on it equally. She hadn't stolen a cent according to any definition a court would recognize. She'd simply kept the account open under her name long after she'd promised to close her half of it, and used that window to spend what I'd built without asking me first, then explained the deficit to me afterward as though I should be grateful to have been included in the decision at all. I withdrew the $341 that remained and closed the account with both hands steady, mostly because I refused to let the teller see them shake. I waited until I was 2 blocks away, sitting in my aunt's car in a grocery store lot, before I let myself cry about it, and even then I gave myself exactly one bad country song on the radio before I wiped my face and drove back to work. I didn't tell my sister I knew. I didn't post about it, didn't confront her at any family gathering, didn't even bring it up with my grandma right away. I filed it away the same way I'd filed away every other small inconsistency over 18 years, except this time I let myself actually notice that the file was getting heavy. I told myself the account was closed, the number was what it was, and there was nothing left to do about it except build something new with what I had left. I genuinely believed for the better part of a year that this was the end of that particular story. It wasn't. It was only the part of the story where the truth went quiet for a while before it came back out somewhere much louder. After the bank, I threw myself into the bookkeeping certificate with a kind of focus I don't think I'd ever applied to anything before, mostly because it was the one part of my life nobody else had a claim on. I finished assignments early. I asked my instructor questions after class until she started leaving 15 minutes open at the end of every session just for me. I picked up a second part-time job doing basic bookkeeping for a small landscaping company 2 of my diner regulars owned, mostly reconciling receipts and running payroll on evenings I wasn't waiting tables. It wasn't glamorous work, but every dollar I earned that year had my name on it in a way nothing in my childhood ever had, and there was a clean, quiet satisfaction in that which I hadn't known to look for until I finally had it. I opened a new account, my name only, no cosigner required, at a different bank than the one that had held my old account. I started with the $341 I'd walked out with and built it back up one deposit at a time, tracking every dollar in the same spiral notebook I'd started at the diner. By early spring, I'd crossed $2,000 again for the first time since the withdrawal, and I remember sitting on my aunt's spare bed doing the math twice just to be sure. My aunt watched all of this happen without much commentary, which I came to understand was her particular love language. She'd occasionally leave a job posting on the kitchen counter with no note attached, and then say nothing further, letting me decide for myself whether to follow up. I took most of what she left for me. I think she knew I would. I finished the certificate program in May, a full semester ahead of pace, and picked up a third client almost immediately, a small hair salon whose owner had heard about me through the landscaping company. By summer, I had 4 regular bookkeeping landscaping clients on top of my diner shifts, and for the first time in my life, I had a bank balance that made me feel steady instead of anxious, built entirely out of my own two hands and nobody else's permission. Nothing about that year was a straight line upward, and I don't want to make it sound like it was. Late that summer, the landscaping company I did books for lost a major contract they'd been counting on, and the owner had to let their part-time help go, including me, with 2 weeks' notice and an apology that felt genuine even as it emptied out almost a third of my monthly income overnight. I panicked more than I let myself admit to my aunt at the time. Rent on the room I'd started paying her a small amount for was due in 11 days. My car needed new brakes I'd been putting off for a month, and I had exactly enough saved to cover one of those two problems, not both. I remember sitting in my aunt's kitchen at midnight with my spiral notebook open, running the same numbers over and over as if repetition might change the total, and feeling, for the first time since I'd left, something close to the old fear that had followed me around my parents' house for 18 years, the fear of not being fine and not having anyone to catch me if I wasn't. I didn't call my mother. That thought crossed my mind exactly once, and I let it pass through and out the other side without acting on it, because I already knew what would happen if I did. The money would come with conditions I wasn't willing to agree to anymore. Instead, I picked up every diner shift I could get for 2 weeks straight, worked the landscaping company's final invoice cycle for free just to keep the relationship warm in case they rehired later, and asked the hair salon owner if she knew anyone else needing part-time books done. She did. A small auto repair shop 2 blocks from her salon needed exactly what I could offer, and by the time my rent was due, I had just enough with $40 to spare, which felt at the time like the largest cushion I'd ever had in my life. The brakes waited another month. I drove carefully and prayed a little more than usual, and when I finally got them fixed in October, the mechanic told me I'd cut it closer than he'd have liked, but hadn't done any real damage waiting. I wrote the whole ordeal down in my notebook in more detail than I'd written almost anything else that year, not because I needed the numbers anymore, but because I wanted proof on a page that I'd handled something hard entirely on my own and come out still standing. While all of that was happening on my end, my sister was, according to occasional family gossip, having the kind of year our parents had always insisted she needed. She took a trip to the coast that summer my parents had paid for outright. No discussion required this time. She started an online lifestyle page not long after, posting about self-care and honoring your own journey, captions that would have struck me as almost funny if I hadn't spent 18 years watching her fail to extend any of those same courtesies to me. My mother's texts, when they came at all, had developed an edge I hadn't heard before I left. "Hope you're doing okay out there on your own," she wrote once, a sentence that managed to sound like concern and accusation in equal measure, as if being okay on my own was a symptom rather than an accomplishment. I didn't answer most of these. I was busy in a way that had nothing performative about it, and busy had slowly become the closest thing I had to peace. I heard secondhand that my sister's internship program, the one that had cost me nearly $6,000 and lasted her 11 days, had quietly become a footnote in the family's version of events, softened into she needed a change of pace rather than she abandoned an opportunity that someone else paid for. Nobody in my family ever used a harder word than that for anything my sister did. Every collapse got renamed until it sounded less like a choice and more like a diagnosis. And every diagnosis came, as far as I could tell, with a bill somebody else was expected to be honored to pay. I've tried to be fair to everyone in this story, my sister included, because I don't think she was born cruel any more than I was born accommodating. She'd been told her whole life that she was fragile, that her feelings were the load-bearing wall of our entire household, and eventually fragile is what she became. Needing things was her whole identity in that house, the same way not needing things had become mine. Neither of us picked our role. We were both cast in it before either of us was old enough to read the script. The lifestyle page picked up a modest following that fall, a few thousand people who liked photos of her coffee and her affirmations and her honesty about hard days, and I scrolled past it exactly once. Out of a curiosity I immediately regretted, and didn't look again after that. It wasn't jealousy, or at least I don't think it was. It was something closer to watching someone build a house on ground I already knew was hollow underneath, and knowing there was nothing I could say that would be heard as anything other than me making it about myself again. The one person who never let a single week go by without checking on me was my grandma, and she did it in the driest, least sentimental way imaginable, which somehow made it land harder than any amount of gentle concern would have. She called every Sunday around 6 in the evening, right after her own dinner, and she never once asked how I was feeling. She asked what I'd been working on, whether the car had given me trouble, whether my aunt was feeding me properly, and buried somewhere in the middle of all those practical questions was the actual checking in, disguised as logistics. She gave me updates on the rest of the family too, unprompted, in the same flat tone she used for everything. "Your sister's page is doing well, apparently," she told me once, in a voice that made it clear she found the whole concept faintly ridiculous. "Your mother mentions it at church like it's a scholarship." Another Sunday she told me my father had been quieter than usual, taking longer walks alone in the evenings. I asked her once why she kept calling every week when nobody had asked her to, and it clearly cost her something socially with the rest of the family, who were not thrilled about her staying in close contact with me. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Because somebody in this family should have been doing this for you 18 years ago, and I'm the only one left who still can." I didn't have anything to say back to that. I just let it sit on the line between us. And then she asked whether I'd started my Christmas shopping yet, and the conversation moved on the way her conversations always did, practical again within seconds, like she'd only allowed herself that one unguarded sentence and was was already moving past it. By the time her own birthday came around the following September, almost exactly a year after I'd carried 2 duffel bags down my parents' driveway, those Sunday calls had become the single steadiest thing in my week, steadier even than my own paychecks. And I think some part of me already understood, without either of us saying it out loud, that whatever happened at her party was going to matter more than either of us was letting on. My grandma turned 70 the last weekend of September, and she called me herself to tell me about it, but she almost never did, phones being in her stated opinion a fad she'd tolerated for 60 years, longer than she'd expected to. They're fighting over where to have it, she told me, sounding more amused than bothered. Your other aunt wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house where she can manage things properly, whatever that means. I told them both no. I asked what she wanted instead, half expecting her to say a quiet dinner somewhere neutral, anywhere that wouldn't require picking a side. I wanted at your apartment complex, she said. That clubhouse room downstairs you mentioned once. I've had my birthdays in kitchens and church halls for 70 years. I'd like one, just once, in the middle of something honest. I told her that felt like a strange choice, that most of the family barely knew where I lived and might not want to make the drive out to a rented clubhouse room. She said, they'll come. I already told them where it is. I announced it to the whole family myself so nobody could quietly wiggle out of it later. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment after that, doing math of a different kind than the bank kind. 30-some relatives, including 2 parents and a sister I hadn't been in the same room with in almost exactly a year, standing in the middle of a life I'd built entirely without their help, in a space I'd chosen, on ground that was, for once, mine. Grandma, I said, Mom will never actually show up to that. She'll come, my grandma said, flat as a griddle. Skipping my 70th after the year we've all had would cost her more socially than showing up and pretending everything's fine ever could. That's exactly why I picked it. It's my birthday. I'm picking the truth being in the room for once, whether anyone likes it or not. I didn't fully understand, hanging up that call, how literally she meant that. I assumed she wanted honesty in the sense of everyone finally being civil to each other in the same space after a year of careful avoidance. I had no idea she was setting a table for something much bigger than civility, and that the truth she was inviting into that room wasn't going to wait to be asked politely before it introduced itself. The morning of the party, I woke up before my alarm and spent almost an hour just lying in bed, doing an inventory of how I actually felt about the day ahead, which was not a habit I'd had a year earlier. I felt mostly calm, not the brittle, performed calm I used to wear around my family like armor, but something closer to genuine steadiness, the kind that comes from having spent a year proving to yourself privately that you can handle things without an audience watching to confirm it. I drove to the clubhouse room a little after 9 to start setting up, folding out the long tables the complex kept in storage for exactly this purpose, wiping down surfaces that hadn't been used in a while, arranging the paper tablecloths my aunt had picked out with me the week before. She came by around 10 with a sheet cake she'd insisted on ordering herself, refusing to let me pay for it, and we spent a while stringing a few strands of cheap lights along the low drop ceiling, more for the gesture than for any real effect under fluorescent panels. If I'm honest, some part of me kept catching myself waiting for the version of the day that matched the version I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times without meaning to. The version where my mother arrived and said something dismissive about the venue. The version where my sister found some small way to make the day about herself before the cake was even cut. I noticed myself bracing for those things the way you brace for weather you've seen coming on the radar for hours, and I made a conscious effort, standing on a step stool taping up the last string of lights to let that bracing go slack. Whatever happened, I told myself, I'd already survived the version of my family that could actually hurt me. Everything left was just logistics. By 11:30, the room was set, folding chairs in loose rows facing the cake table, a gift table by the door already collecting a handful of wrapped boxes my grandma installed at the head of the longest table in a chair my aunt had padded with a spare cushion from her own apartment. I stood near the entrance for a moment before the bulk of the family arrived, looking at the room I'd built for someone I loved with money and hands that were entirely my own, and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, something close to pride that had nothing complicated attached to it. That feeling lasted almost exactly until my sister walked through the door. My sister walked in already annoyed, and I could tell before she said a word, the same way you can tell weather is about to turn from the color the sky goes right before it does. She'd apparently spent the year telling anyone who'd listen that I'd thrown a tantrum over a birthday party and abandoned a family in crisis to punish everyone, and some part of her clearly expected to find me exactly where she'd left me, small, apologetic, waiting to be welcomed back once I'd learned my lesson about making things about myself. She found out otherwise within about 10 minutes, and not from me. One of our cousins, catching up with her near the gift table, mentioned offhand that I'd been building a real client list on top of finishing a certificate program early, that I had my own apartment with my name alone on the lease. I watched my sister's expression shift in real time from bored to something considerably sharper. "What do you even do now?" she asked me directly, loud enough that several nearby conversations paused, in a tone that made the question sound less like curiosity and more like an accusation she'd been saving up. "I do bookkeeping for a few small businesses," I told her. "I finished a certificate program in the spring. I still pick up shifts at a diner sometimes too." She laughed, short and sharp, the kind of laugh designed to be heard by the room rather than just by me. "Must be nice," she said, "having absolutely no real responsibilities weighing on you, while some of us have actually been carrying real burdens this whole time." I didn't say anything back to that. I'd learned, over 18 years, and then one very instructive additional one, that silence in front of an audience does more work than arguing ever could, and that answering Answering an accusation like that on her terms only ever handed her more material to work with. My mother, standing near the drinks table with a paper cup of lemonade, laughed along with her. The easy, practiced laugh she used whenever she wanted a room to agree with her, without anyone having to think too hard about why. "Sweetie," she said to me, not unkindly, in the exact voice she'd used to smooth over a spilled drink. "Not everyone gets handed a fairy tale the way your sister has worked so hard for hers." I felt something in me that had stayed level for almost exactly a year begin, quietly, to crack. I want to be clear that I hadn't gone into that party planning to say anything at all. I'd told myself, driving over that morning, that the day belonged entirely to my grandma, that I'd stay near the back, eat a slice of cake, and let the whole afternoon pass without becoming about anything other than her 70th birthday. But hearing my mother describe my sister's unfinished internship and her family-funded vacation as a fairy tale she'd earned, while standing close enough to me that I could smell her lemonade, standing exactly 3 feet from the daughter who'd actually built something real out of nothing but a diner apron and a spiral notebook, did something to the calm I'd spent a whole year constructing. It didn't shatter. It cracked, the way a windshield cracks from a single small impact and then just sits there, fragile in a way you can't see from a distance, waiting for the next thing to finish the job. I opened my mouth, and I'm honestly not sure, even now, what I would have said if I'd gotten the chance. Something about the $6,000 maybe, something about 11 days versus 3 years of Saturdays, something calm and devastating I'd been quietly composing in the back of my mind for the better part of a year without ever expecting to actually need it. I didn't get the chance to find out what I would have said because my sister got there first, and what came out of her wasn't composed at all. That's when my sister lost it. All at once, like something that had been held together with tape for a very long time, finally gave out completely. "Of course it's a fairy tale," she said, her voice climbing fast enough that conversations across the room went quiet in a ripple, starting near us and spreading outward. "Everything about me is a fairy tale, isn't it? Nothing about it is real. You want to hear about my real internship, Mom? You want everyone here to hear about it?" My mother's face went very still. I don't think she'd expected my sister to be the one to open this particular door. "I lasted 11 days, my sister said, louder now, turning to face the room instead of just us, her hands shaking at her sides. 11 days, and I quit because I was homesick and scared, and I called home crying like a child. And you all rescued me the same way you always rescue me, and nobody ever asks what that actually cost, do they? Nobody ever asks where that deposit money came from." She turned to look at me directly then, and for one long second, something that might have been shame crossed her face before it hardened back into whatever had been building in her all afternoon. "It came from her account," she said, pointing at me without quite looking at me anymore. "Her 3 years of Saturdays. Nearly $6,000 she saved one shift at a time since she was 14. And Mom took it out of the joint account 3 weeks before her 18th birthday and gave it to me for a program I quit before I'd even unpacked my second suitcase. And then we canceled her birthday on top of it, because apparently my feelings mattered more than money she'd actually earned." The room had gone completely silent, 30-some relatives frozen mid-conversation, mid-bite of cake, all of it stopped cold. My grandma, seated where we'd set her chair, didn't move, didn't reach for anyone, just watched with an expression I couldn't fully read, though I thought I saw something like grim satisfaction underneath the shock. My sister grabbed the edge of the nearest table to steady herself, and in doing so knocked over a pitcher of lemonade, sending it sheeting across the paper tablecloth directly onto the corner of the sheet cake my aunt had ordered, frosting smearing pink and wet in front of every single relative in that room. "I always make everything about me," she said, mimicking my mother's own accusation from earlier that afternoon, except she was saying it about herself now, tears running freely down her face. None of it performed the way I'd half expected. This one was real. "I ruined her birthday for 11 days that didn't even matter. I ruined it for nothing. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody moved to defend our mother either," which was its own kind of answer. 30-some relatives doing a year's worth of quiet arithmetic all at once and arriving in the space of about 90 seconds at the same obvious sum. My aunt, my dad's sister, finally broke the silence. She looked directly at my mother, not at my sister, and said in a voice that carried clearly across the whole room, "You did this. You built her entire personality around being fragile and needing rescuing, and now you're standing here shocked that she can't hold herself together in a room with folding chairs in it. You did this to both of them." My mother didn't say anything back. She just stood there with her paper cup still in her hand, staring at the ruined corner of the cake like she was waiting for someone else to come clean it up for her, the way someone else had always cleaned up everything else in that house for 18 years running. I didn't say anything either, at least not right away. I stood there in the middle of the room I'd rented with my own money, in front of the family that had spent a year believing I was the one who'd broken something, and watched the actual truth finally finish the job I'd walked in that morning telling myself I wasn't going to start. My sister was still crying, quieter now, one hand pressed over her mouth like she was trying to physically stop any more of it from coming out. My dad hadn't moved from his spot near the drinks table, and when I finally looked over at him, his face had the particular stillness of a man watching something he should have said out loud years ago finally say itself without him. My grandma reached over and took my hand without a word, her grip firmer than I expected, and I realized, standing there with lemonade slowly soaking into the paper tablecloth, and 30-some relatives still frozen around us, that this was exactly the room she'd said she wanted. Something honest. She hadn't known, when she picked this venue over a church hall or her own kitchen, exactly what shape the honesty was going to take, but she'd known somehow that if enough people were in the same room for long enough, it was going to come out on its own. My mother finally set her paper cup down, her hand not quite steady doing it, and for one long moment she looked at me across the room room the way you'd look at someone you were about to ask for something, though she never got the chance to actually ask it out loud because my sister chose that exact moment to sit down hard in the nearest folding chair and put her face in both hands, and the sound she made then wasn't crying anymore, so much as something closer to a long, exhausted collapse. 18 years of being everyone's emergency finally arriving somewhere it couldn't be managed away. Nobody moved to fix it. For the first time in the entire history of our family, nobody rushed in to make it smaller or quieter or more convenient for someone else to bear. And I stood there holding my grandmother's hand in a rented clubhouse room with a ruined cake and a family finally seeing all at once and out loud exactly what 18 years of being fine on my own had actually cost.